Close your eyes for a moment. Now imagine a city, the biggest, richest city in the entire world. A city full of grand buildings, tall chimneys, busy markets, and powerful men in top hats. Gas lamps flicker along cobblestone streets. Horse-drawn carriages rattle past. The River Thames is packed with ships carrying goods from every corner of the globe. This is London. The year is 1888, and from the outside, it looks like a dream. But now, open your eyes a little wider, look past the fancy streets, walk away from the bright shops and the warm restaurants. Walk toward the dark alleys, the broken doorways, and the shivering figures huddled against the cold stone walls. Because this is also the real London. A London where thousands of people, men, women, and children, had nothing. No warm bed, no hot meal, no hope. In 1888, London had a population of over 5 million people. It was a city bursting at the seams. Workers poured in from the countryside, hoping to find jobs in the factories and docks. Some found work, many did not. And for those who couldn't find steady employment, life on the streets was brutal. There was no government help, no safety net, no phone to call for aid. If you had no money, you had nothing. And if you had nothing, you had to find a way to survive. 1 penny at a time. Tonight, we are going to follow one man through a single night in Victorian London. His name is Thomas. He is 34 years old, though he looks much older. He used to work at the docks, loading and unloading heavy crates. But 3 weeks ago, he hurt his back badly. He could not work. And when you could not work in 1888, you could not eat. You could not pay rent. You could not survive, unless you were very, very clever about every single penny. Thomas woke up that morning on a park bench, his coat damp from the November fog. His stomach growled, his back ached. He had exactly 1 penny left in his pocket. 1 penny, and the sun was already going down. He needed to figure out how to survive the night. And in London, in 1888, surviving the night was not as simple as it sounds. As the cold crept in and the fog thickened over the Thames, Thomas walked through the narrow streets of the East End. This part of London, places like Whitechapel, Stepney, and Bethnal Green, was where the poorest people lived. The streets smelled of coal smoke, damp wool, and rotting vegetables from the market stalls that had long since closed. Thomas knew these streets well. He had walked them many times before when money was tight. He passed a group of children sitting near a fire barrel, their faces smudged with soot. He passed a woman selling hot chestnuts from a small cart, the warm smell teasing his empty stomach. He passed men standing in doorways, staring at the ground with the hollow look of people who had given up dreaming.
God bless
Thomas
you anyway.
pressed his cold fist around his 1 penny and kept walking. After about 20 minutes, he arrived at a large, plain building with a single gas lamp above the door. A handwritten sign on the wall read, "Penny sit-up, warm shelter, 1 penny." Thomas stopped. He had heard of these places. In fact, he had used one before, 2 winters ago, when work dried up on the docks. He pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The room was enormous, long and low ceiling, lit by a few dim gas lamps hanging from the walls. Row after row of wooden benches stretched from one end to the other, packed with men and a few women, all huddled together in their thin, ragged coats. The air smelled of damp clothing, tobacco, and unwashed bodies, but it was warm, and to Thomas that warmth was everything. A man at the door, large, thick-armed, with a no-nonsense expression, held out his hand. Thomas placed his penny in the man's palm. The man gave a curt nod and let him through. Thomas found a spot on one of the benches near the back, squeezed between an old man with a gray beard and a younger fellow who couldn't have been more than 19.
Sorry.
He sat down,
Terribly sorry.
and the relief in his legs was immediate. He hadn't realized how much his feet ached until he finally sat. But here was the cruel rule of the penny sit-up. You were not allowed to sleep. You paid your penny for warmth and shelter, nothing more. A man called the monitor walked back and forth between the rows all night long, watching. The moment your head drooped, the moment your eyes closed, he would tap you sharply on the shoulder. Oi, wake up. And you had to sit straight again, eyes open, fighting the exhaustion with every ounce of will you had left. Think about that for a moment. You are cold, hungry, exhausted. Your body is begging you to close your eyes. But you cannot, because sleep, actual sleep, costs more than you have. Sleep in Victorian London was a luxury. As the night dragged on, Thomas watched the others around him fight the same battle. The old man beside him kept nodding off, only to jerk awake each time the monitor came near. A woman at the far end of the room was quietly crying, her face turned toward the wall. The young man on his other side was staring at the ceiling, his lips moving silently, perhaps praying, perhaps just counting the hours. Thomas had heard about other options. If you had 2 pennies, you could go to what was known as the twopenny hangover. It was a step up, just barely. In those places, a thick rope was stretched across the room at chest height. The lodgers would lean against it, hanging their arms and upper body over it like washing over a line. It was uncomfortable, it was strange, but it allowed you to actually sleep because the rope would stop you from falling forward onto the floor. A man George Orwell would later write about it decades on, calling the monitor who cut the rope at 5 in the morning simply the valet, a darkly comic name for a man whose only job was to wake the poor by dropping them to the floor. And if you had 4 pennies, well then you were almost rich by East End standards. 4 pennies got you a wooden box, roughly the shape and size of a coffin, which is exactly what they were called. The 4-penny coffin. You would climb inside, pull a piece of rough tarpaulin over yourself, and lie there in the dark until morning. It wasn't comfortable, but you were off the street, off your feet, and actually horizontal. For many people, that was heaven. Thomas had used the twopenny hangover once, a long time ago. He remembered the rope digging into his chest, the snoring of men on either side of him, and the sharp shock of the rope being cut at dawn. The way everyone tumbled forward, half asleep and confused. He had not loved the experience, but at least he had slept. Tonight, though, he had only 1 penny. So here he sat, upright, eyes open, fighting sleep with every breath. Around midnight, the room grew quieter. Some people gave up fighting and slept anyway, heads resting on their folded arms against the back of the bench in front of them. Like school children at their desks, the monitor let them be. He had grown tired too, it seemed. Thomas allowed himself to close his eyes for just a moment. Just a moment. The warmth of the room, the soft sounds of breathing all around him, the distant clatter of carriage wheels outside. It all wrapped around him like a thin blanket. And for the first time in days, he felt something close to peace. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the door of the penny sit-up swung open with a bang. The monitor, now wide awake again, walked the length of the room, clapping his hands and shouting, "Up, everyone up, out you go." There was no gentle good morning, no hot cup of tea, no warm farewell. You had paid your penny for the night, and the night was over. You were now someone else's problem, specifically the street's problem. Thomas stood up slowly, his back screaming in protest from a night of sitting upright on a hard wooden bench. Around him, others shuffled to their feet, wrapping their coats tighter, pulling their hats down over their ears. The old man with the gray beard, the one who had spent all night nodding off, stood and looked around with the dazed expression of someone who had forgotten, just for a second, where he was. Then he remembered, and the sadness that crossed his face was something Thomas would not forget. Outside, the London streets were just beginning to wake. The sky was a pale gray, the fog still thick, the air sharp as a blade. Costermongers were setting up their stalls.
Sleep or food.
A milk cart rattled past, the horse breathing clouds of steam into the cold morning air. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang, 5 slow, heavy chimes that seemed to fall from the sky like stones into still water. Thomas stood on the pavement, hands in his empty pockets, and breathed in the cold air. He had survived the night. That was something. Not much, but something. Around him, the other men from the sit-up dispersed into the streets, each going their own way, each carrying their own invisible weight. Today, he would need to find work,
Out you go!
even light work, carrying bags at the market, sweeping shop fronts, running messages for a few farthings. His back still hurt, but hunger hurts more than a bad back when you haven't eaten properly in 2 days. He needed to earn at least 2 pennies by tonight. 2 pennies meant the rope, and the rope meant sleep, real sleep. And right now, sleep felt like the most precious thing in the entire world. This was the reality of life for tens of thousands of people in Victorian London. Every single day was a calculation. Every penny was a decision. Do you spend it on a bit of bread, or do you save it for shelter? Do you rest tonight and go hungry? Or do you push through the hunger and keep working, hoping tomorrow will be better? There were no easy answers. There was only survival. The penny sit-ups, the twopenny hangovers, the 4-penny coffins. These were not just quirky pieces of historical trivia. They were the safety net of last resort. In a city that had no proper safety net at all, they were the difference, for many people, between surviving the night and not surviving it. It has been recorded that on some of the coldest nights, people were found in the morning who could not be woken, not because they were sleeping too deeply, but because they had frozen to death, right there on the street, just a few doors down from the warmth they could not afford. And yet, people kept going. People like Thomas kept getting up every morning, kept putting one foot in front of the other, kept searching for that next penny. Because what else could you do? Life, even a hard life, has a way of pulling you forward.
Over here, lad.
As Thomas walked away from the shelter and into the waking city, he passed a newspaper boy, shouting the morning headlines. He passed a baker's shop, where the smell of fresh bread drifted out through the open door like a cruel joke. He passed a well-dressed gentleman in a tall hat, striding purposefully to some important meeting, not glancing at Thomas even once. 2 worlds, 1 city. A few cobblestone streets apart, and an entire lifetime away from each other. By mid-morning, Thomas had found work helping a fruit seller at a nearby market, hauling boxes, rearranging crates, doing whatever his sore back allowed. By the afternoon, he had earned 3 pennies. He spent one on a warm potato from a street vendor and held the other 2 carefully in his fist. Tonight, he would go to the twopenny hangover. Tonight he would sleep. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He never did. But for now, tonight, there was a rope and a few hours of sleep waiting for him. And in the gray, foggy, brutal world of Victorian London, that was enough. That was everything. The next time you lie down in your bed tonight, your warm, soft, comfortable bed, think of Thomas. Think of the thousands of people just like him who walked the streets of London in 1888. People who worked hard, who tried their best, who were brought down by nothing more than bad luck, bad health, or simply being born into the wrong circumstances. They were not lazy. They were not foolish. They were human beings, living in a world that had not yet learned how to look after its most vulnerable people. A world where sleep, the most basic, natural thing a human body needs, had a price tag, where you could sit up for a penny, hang over a rope for 2 pennies, or lie in a wooden box for 4, where the right to rest was not a right at all, but a commodity, something to be bought and sold like coal or bread. History has a way of making the past feel distant and unreal, but the people who lived in Victorian London were as real as you and me. They felt cold, they felt hunger, they felt fear and loneliness, and the deep, aching tiredness of a body pushed too far for too long. Their stories deserve to be told. Their struggle deserves to be remembered. So remember Thomas tonight. Remember the penny sit-up and the twopenny hangover. Remember the 4-penny coffin and the monitor with his sharp tap on the shoulder. Remember that once upon a time, in the greatest city in the world, thousands of people had to pay for the right to close their eyes.